Today I'm going to be sharing some of my favorite writing podcasts. They have truly helped me with my writing craft and helped me get my author business going. So let's get into it. If you're new here, my name is Taylor Sievers. I'm a fiction and nonfiction author, and here on this channel, I'm just sharing my writing journey, tips and tricks that I've learned along the way, and as well as some book recommendations and other things that might help you if you're a new author or if you're just interested in the writing world. I'm going to start this list by going from, I don't want to say least to greatest, but I'm going to lead up to my absolute favorite podcast ever. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the first podcast I have on my list is one of the earlier ones that I listened to, and this was one that I listened to when I was still thinking about traditional publishing. So if you don't know, I'm an indie published author, which means that I self-published my books so far. Doesn't mean that I'm against traditional publishing. It doesn't mean that I was rejected in some way. I didn't even try, to be honest. So the first podcast that I'm going to share is called The Shit No One Tells You About Writing, and this has 3 co-hosts, Bianca Murray, Cece Lyra, and Carly Waters. So Cece Lyra and Carly Waters are literary agents, and then Bianca Murray is an author, and I believe the other 2 are authors as well. I know that Cece Lyra has already published some books, and I think Carly Waters is working on a book possibly. Again, I haven't listened to this one in a little bit, and it's not because it's a bad podcast at all. It's just because it's a little bit more geared towards traditionally published authors. So what I really liked about the podcast at the time was in the beginning, there's a segment where they help you with your query letters. So they either have some sample query letters that people will submit and then they will critique them, or sometimes they'll actually have the person on and have them read their query letter and then go back and forth with them, kind of coach them. And or sometimes they'll have like the first couple chapters and they'll kind of coach them through that. So that's what I found really helpful about this podcast, was you're actually getting to hear actual literary agents talk about what they look for in query letters and give you tips and tricks. They also have a segment sometimes where they'll get like a bookstagrammer on, or someone that's really into book recs, and they can help you find comp titles for your books so that when you're writing your query letter, you can say, well, this is like this book. And they also will share just kind of what they're looking for in books and some of their insights on what makes a good book, what doesn't, so on. And they also will do author interviews later on, or interviews with industry professionals. And those have been great as well. The whole thing has been wonderful. I just, again, haven't really listened to them lately because it is so geared more towards people that are really looking to get into the trad publishing route. I have learned a lot about the book publishing industry from them, so I really did appreciate this podcast at the time. It's just that I started learning about other people, and that one's just kind of fallen by the wayside. But lots of value packed into this podcast. So this one's called The Shit No One Tells You About Writing. The next podcast on my list is also a podcast that I don't really listen to as much anymore, but it was the first writing podcast that I started listening to. And it was probably the first one just because the name of the podcast at the time was the first one to pop up because of what I was searching to search for the podcast. I was looking for writing podcasts specifically, and literally the podcast at the time was called How Do You Write by Rachel Herron. It is now called Ink in Your Veins, so I haven't listened to it since she rebranded, but I think all of the information is still probably the same. She has been a writer for quite a long time. She's taught writing for quite a long time, and so I really appreciate her voice. It's very soothing, and she's just had a lot of experience. She's published as well, and she has a lot of great interviews with other people too, and I think it's a little bit more geared towards traditional publishing, or just literary public, I don't know, being kind of more academic with all of this. Again, I'm an indie author, so some of the ones that I'm going to talk about going forward, they're a little bit more geared towards building up your author business from a self-publishing perspective, I guess you would say, and not as much focused on, I don't want to say craft, because we're always improving our writing craft, right? But she's a little bit more academic, I guess I would say. I feel like her writing and her teaching is a little bit more geared towards these are the steps and the formulas to create a great story. And this is how you actually go about these things. This is how you improve your craft, and make it beautiful and make it something, worth standing the test of time. Not that you can't when you're an indie author, but I do feel like as an indie author, sometimes you can be a little bit more focused on the business of being an author. And so you might write to market more, or you might, I don't know, not be as focused on structure and more focused on trends and all of that. So that's just an example. I don't really know if I'm explaining that right, but it's a great podcast. And again, I haven't listened to it in a little bit, but I'm sure that you will gain a lot of insight from it, and you can always look at her older episodes as well. Next podcast I'm going to recommend is put on by the Alliance of Independent Authors. It's called the Allied Podcast. They share a lot of different tips and tricks, information, helping you get your words out there in the world. So again, this is focused on independent publishing. There's not one host, there's like multiple hosts, mostly anybody that's kind of involved in Ally. Really great information. I found it very helpful. It's not like, I feel like with that one, you don't really connect as much with you kind of connect with the hosts more when it's the same host, right? And so they have different ones. You'll recognize the names over time as you become more familiar with them, but it's not as, I will say, personable, but you do get a lot of information there, and they interview other people, and so it is great. It's a great resource for sure. Definitely a great free resource, so you should check them out. The next one I'm going to recommend is more of a craft podcast. This one's called Fiction Writing Made Easy by Savannah Gilbo, and she was one of the first people that I found when I was trying to find podcasts that were about writing. And she goes in, like, especially her earlier episodes, she has some interviews now, but earlier it was more of a solo episode where she's discussing a particular thing involving the writing craft. So she would be talking about the genre conventions for a horror story or a romance story, like what do you need to include? And she's a book coach, so she helps you. She's not necessarily an editor, I believe she could be now, but she helps people kind of pull themselves together and get their story written and get it out there. She's wanting to help you write your book. So she's wanting to coach you through that process. And her podcast is one way that she does that. You can also interact with her. She has a lot of free worksheets that you can download that'll really help too. So I found it really useful when I was learning about just story in general. Like, how do you craft a great story? There were things in there that I was like, oh, I didn't realize that I'm already doing this, but I didn't know why I was doing it. And so it kind of helps you a little bit. So I really have appreciated that podcast, and she's still putting out some great episodes. Next one that I'll mention is Wish I'd Known Then podcast, and the co-hosts are Sarah Rosette and Jamie Albright. They are both independently published authors. I love this podcast. It's definitely one for if you're wanting to get into, like, how do we actually write a book? You're going to want to look at Savannah Gilbo's podcast and Rachel Herron's Ink in Your Veins podcast first, because they're a lot more about craft, I feel like, and how do you develop a really great story, whereas Wish I'd Known Then is kind of more of a commiseration, I guess, or it's just nice because you get to hear from other authors and their journey and how they got to where they've gotten to and what they would change if they were starting over again. And so now that I've kind of had some experience, it's been really nice to listen to this, but I don't know if when I was starting in the very beginning, if I would have understood what they were talking about a lot of the time. Because there's software, there's tools, there's resources that they talk about that I just totally wouldn't have known what they were talking about. Not saying that you can't jump in anytime and listen to it, but I've really enjoyed them. It's been great to kind of even hear their personal updates And it's just, their interviews are so great. I've really enjoyed who they've interviewed and how they interview, and it's just been a great podcast. So because of that podcast, the Wish I'd Known Then podcast, I started listening to this other podcast. They had a guest on there called Nicholas Harvey, and he was interviewed about his experience as an independent author, and apparently he has a podcast. So I have just recently started listening to his podcast. It's called the Two Authors Podcast, and he co-hosts it with Douglas Pratt. And it's my new favorite. I've just had so much fun. Okay, it's not my old-time favorite because I'm not there yet, but this one is one of my favorites. These guys are funny and relaxed, but they're not afraid to kind of get down to the nitty-gritty when they interview these other authors. So again, this is more of a, okay, I am writing. Okay, so this is already like, I am writing, I am in this world, I am intending to publish, so on. This is when you would want to listen to them. They had someone on there that was talking about Facebook ads, and they'll ask them their very pointed questions about like what's working, what's not working, how do you post on social media, how do you do this? And it's just great. It's great to hear other authors' experiences, but it's also great for the interviewers to actually ask such pointed, direct questions so that you, as an author, developing your author business. So I've really enjoyed the Two Authors podcasts. You should give them a listen. So I feel like I've given you a good balance of podcasts that will help you with your writing craft and podcasts that will help you glean some insights from other authors or learn about the publishing world, learn about indie authors, learn about trad publishing. I feel like everything I've given you so far has been pretty, you could just listen to those and it would be pretty decently well-rounded. But my absolute favorite podcast of all time is Joanna Penn's podcast, The Creative Penn, with a double N. I have absolutely loved her, and I wanted to include her in this list, of course, because she has helped me immensely. I don't want to fangirl too much right now, but I don't think I can put into words how much this podcast has really helped me. I think she's on about episode like 800 something right now, so she's been doing this for a long time. She has books out, she does have a blog and all of that, but it's just been great to kind of follow her. I started listening to her, I think she was like at episode 600 then. I'll say that if you, again, are kind of in the earlier stages of your author journey, you might want to go backwards a little bit and listen to some of her earlier episodes. That way you kind of understand what she's talking about with certain technology. She is very she loves technology, she loves AI. I am personally not an AI person. I have dabbled with like ChatGPT and stuff because apparently everybody is, I don't know. But I'm not like, I'm not one of those people that wanted to adopt it, and I'm not very excited about it. I'm really not. But I do appreciate her updates on AI. I feel like I know, at least, even if I'm not super excited about it, at least I know more about the industry, and I'm not just completely ignorant. So that's about it for my list. I just want to share this list with you today because I think it's important as writers that we are always improving our craft. I've also gotten a lot of questions lately with releasing my book into the world and just talking to people locally who are like, whoa, you wrote a book. You live in a small town area, and so it's kind of, people are intrigued by that, and I get a lot of questions about like, well, how did you go about this? And it's kind of hard to summarize all of the steps that you take and all of the ways that you can go about writing a book and all of the ways that you can go about building your author business. But if you start listening to these people, and again, they have like social media and they have YouTube channels and they have this and that, you can kind of enter into the world of writing, and then you understand what it takes to write a book. You understand what it takes to build up an author brand, an author business, what it takes to market your book. And you can kind of commiserate with other authors in some way. Like, it's kind of fun to connect with people by listening to them have conversations, which is so weird, but this is where we're at. Also, if I read a book, I really like to, if I loved the book, I really want to know more about the author. And any chance I get to actually hear the author talk is really fun. I enjoy that a lot. And sometimes it's not what I thought it was going to be, but it's still really fun. So I will go and search for interviews of that author. And these podcasts, a lot of times they have some really well-known authors on their podcast talking about their writing process. It's just intriguing to me. For example, in the Two Authors podcast specifically, they're not like, they'll talk about how like they're not super big time people, but they've had some really big authors on their podcast, both traditionally published and self-published. So that's been really cool. And I've just appreciated that as well. So with these podcasts, you can learn more about the technology that you might need in order to write and publish your book. So I use Scrivener. I would have never known about Scrivener had I not listened to people like Joanna Penn. I'm able to drag and drop scenes and chapters around easily instead of trying to organize them as Word documents or in Google Docs or anything like that. I've also learned about things like BookFunnel, where I can deliver ebooks straight to your reading device, whether it's a Kobo reader, whether it's a Kindle. I can send them from my author shop right to your device. So that's really cool. I wouldn't have known about that if I wouldn't have been listening to these people. I wouldn't have known about how to format my book. I'm actually looking at upgrading my computer to hopefully use Vellum, which is who sponsors the Two Authors podcast. So I wouldn't have known about them. I wouldn't have known how great or how bad some of these products are if I wouldn't have been listening to these people. And so I just thought that this would be a good little video to share. And if you have any more questions, please drop them in the comments. I love to talk about all things writing a little bit too much, and I feel like sometimes I don't know anybody personally that actually understands what I'm talking about. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments, and you can always email me too. So thanks for watching today, and I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you don't mind, it would be great if you could either like give this video a thumbs up, or you could subscribe or share this video with a friend that you think might find some value in it. Any little bit is going to help this channel get put in front of people's eyeballs, and hopefully it can help people. So if you're like me, you're probably in the middle of your book and avoiding focusing on it. So get back to writing right now. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you soon.